Welcome back to the Unstoppable Project, everybody. I'm Dr. David Hooper, and in the last episode, I talked about why this podcast is back, why I felt it needed to return, and what this new chapter is all about. Today, I want to get a lot more personal, because one thing I really care about when it comes to this podcast is being really honest. Not polished honesty, not the kind where people mention something difficult just to sound relatable, but I mean real honesty, the kind that actually tells the truth about what life feels like sometimes. And for me, one of those truths is anxiety. From the outside, I think it would be very easy for people to look at my life and make certain assumptions. They might see someone building a business, running ultramarathons, posting social media content, talking about the right things, resilience, mental toughness, discipline, courage, and make the assumption that I feel solid and on top of my game all of the time. Almost like confidence comes naturally, that I'm calm under pressure, that I've got some sort of bulletproof mindset, that I don't overthink or wobble, or even that I don't get in my own way. That would not be true. In fact, it couldn't be further from the truth, because anxiety has been part of my life now for about 3 to 3.5 years. And I wanted to do this episode because I know I'm not the only one trying to build something meaningful whilst also carrying anxiety in the background. I know I'm not the only one trying to chase big goals with that noisy mind, or I'm not the only person trying to be brave whilst also overthinking. So this episode's really important to me, because when you're trying to lead while doubting yourself, while you're trying to keep moving, while your own brain is making things difficult, I think this is a conversation that matters, because anxiety can be incredibly isolating. It can make you feel weak. It can make you think that you're broken. It can make you feel like everyone else has almost been given an easier ride, that their brain is more capable than yours, because anxiety just fills up that brain space. And the funny thing is, though, some of the strongest, most ambitious, capable people that I've ever come across have got anxiety. I had a coffee with a friend just last week who casually mentioned that they've built a multi-six-figure business over a year or two, yet they were crippled with anxiety. So just because somebody is feeling like anxiety is holding them back, it doesn't actually mean you can't go and achieve everything that you want to achieve. So today I want to talk honestly about my experiences with anxiety, how it's affected me, where it's held me back, what it's taught me, and what I'm learning about carrying it without letting it completely run the show. Because that, to me, is a big part of what unstoppable actually means. Not never feeling anxious and not becoming some emotionless robot, but learning how to keep building a meaningful life that you're passionate about, whilst anxiety is still part of that picture. So let's get into it. I think one of the reasons anxiety is hard to talk about is because people often have a very narrow image of what it looks like. They imagine someone who is visibly panicking, frozen, unable to function, unable to cope. And sometimes anxiety does look like that. And I am certainly one of the people who has experienced anxiety paralysis. I've had times where I have been lying on the floor, unable to move, because I was in such a state that my wife had to come and help me kind of move out of that state. So, but that is at one end of the scale where you are panicked, you are frozen with anxiety, with fear almost as well, and you're very overwhelmed and just unable to cope with that situation. But it also means a lot of other things. Sometimes anxiety looks like smiling and showing up even while your mind is racing. I've been there and done that as well. Sometimes it looks like being productive even whilst your mind is whirring away. Sometimes it looks like overthinking a simple decision for far too long. I know we've all been there. And sometimes it looks like sending the message or posting the thing on social media or going to the meeting or making that phone call, but carrying the constant internal tension while you do it. And I think that's important to say because I've spent a lot of time functioning while I have also been incredibly anxious as well. So we have to be able to find the line between having anxiety but also still working, still building, still training, still turning up, and still trying to do what needs to be done. But that doesn't mean it'll ever feel particularly easy internally. And I think that can be a bit confusing because you can look fine from the outside while your inner world feels anything but fine. And for a long time, I used to say that I was wearing a mask. I put the mask on when I go to work, which is not a healthy way to live. But it was a way of compartmentalizing the fact I still needed to get certain bits of work done while I was dealing with my anxiety. Because you can be capable and anxious at the same time. They can work together. It's not always pleasant. Neither is being ambitious and anxious, or high functioning and anxious, or driven and anxious. And I think because of that, people often don't see that anxiety. Sometimes they don't see it because you hide it well. Like I said, I used to say I used to wear a mask. Sometimes they don't see it because you don't fully know how to explain how you're feeling, and that's totally understandable. And sometimes others don't see your anxiety because you've got so used to carrying it that you also stop questioning it yourself. And it just becomes part of that background noise and something you deal with. And that is not something that you should aim to achieve. We don't want to just deal with anxiety. Ideally, we want to get rid of it or as much as we can, or we want to manage your anxiety in a more productive way. We don't want it to always just be background noise. But for me, that is what anxiety has felt like. This noise, this pressure, almost like this mental static. A brain that doesn't let things stay simple is probably what I'd say about me. Um, but for me, anxiety has rarely been one dramatic thing. It's usually been a collection of things, whether it's my mind constantly racing ahead into the future, catastrophizing what might happen, whether it's overthinking conversations before they happen, but also replaying things after they've happened as well, making situations feel bigger than they probably are. It's feeling pressure in moments that should be pretty straightforward. It's the sense that your mind is slightly too on. It's struggling to settle, it's dread, it's tension, it's a kind of restlessness that can be hard to switch off. And the thing about anxiety is that it doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it tells you exactly what it is. Other times it disguises itself as urgency or pressure or irritability or indecision or procrastination or perfectionism or just that feeling you can't quite breathe properly inside your own life. there have been plenty of moments where I've looked fine on the outside, but felt absolutely wired internally. Moments where I've had things to do, opportunities in front of me, a plan I believed in, and still felt that churn in my head. And one of the hardest parts of anxiety, at least for me, is that it can make small things feel really heavy. So messaging somebody feels heavy. Trying to make the right decision, what we're going to have for tea, what you're going to watch on television. These decisions feel crazy heavy. Having a whole week feel uncertain feels heavy. Certain conversations, all of these things make you just feel heavier than it really should. And when enough things feel heavy all at once, it can start to affect how you show up in your own life. And that's when anxiety stops just being a feeling and starts shaping behavior. And that's where it can get costly. And I think from reflecting on my own journey with anxiety, I think anxiety's affected my life in ways that are both pretty obvious but also subtle. I mean, firstly, my confidence, of course, has been knocked at times, but the main thing that I struggle with is overwhelm. So, managing a business, a family, all of these different things, and making sure I'm on top of everything, making sure my clients are happy, making sure I'm doing all of the different things my business needs, but also that pressure that I'm putting myself to be as close to perfect as possible whilst still moving forward. It affects the decisions I make. So that example from what should we have for tea is real. What are we gonna do on at the weekend? What do you want to watch on television? When I'm feeling anxious, I'm unable to make those micro decisions, and it really kind of affects how much I overthink things that really didn't need that much thought. So these are really interesting things. I think the other things are it affects how easy it is for me to relax. So trying to fall asleep whilst my mind is running, watching TV with my wife, my mind is going, all of these different things that I'd usually kind of just being able to switch off with, it just doesn't happen when I'm suffering. Because I think anxiety has this way of making not enough feel like the default setting. It's something that I struggle with a lot. Not doing enough, not making major moves fast enough, not achieving enough, not being clear enough with what you're doing, and just generally not being good enough. And oh man, that is completely exhausting, as you will know if you've had anxiety, because even when you're making progress, anxiety can still sit there whispering that it isn't enough yet. And I also think that anxiety has definitely shown up in my business life. When you are building something, there is already uncertainty, responsibility, and pressure built into that process. There are decisions to make regularly, and when it's you, which is just me, making all those decisions, it's a lot. There's risk to take, responsibility to take, things to put out into the world, people to speak to, people to follow up with, opportunities to pursue. It can all be a lot. And then when you add anxiety into the mix, it's not a great combination. And it just led me to overthink those simple actions, feel that pressure and second guess my instincts. And that is something that I'm still learning to deal with, and it's something that really hit me hard at the back end of 2025, dealing with difficult people, difficult clients, trying to make sure that you are giving the clients exactly what they want, all of these things can really be affected be or lead to, anxiety as well. So it can really make you hesitate. And then the other side is putting yourself out there. So whether it's building a personal brand or just trying to meet new people, talking openly about what you believe in, what you've been through, what you stand for, what you want to be known for, it that opens you up. And anxiety loves that vulnerability. It loves those moments where you're visible, exposed almost, uncertain of how something will land. So yes, anxiety has definitely affected me there too. But I've tried to never let anxiety stop me from the things that I both want to do and things I feel like I should be doing. But it's definitely enough to make the process more mentally tiring than people might realize. And I think one of the hardest things about this is that anxiety doesn't stop you completely. Sometimes it just makes it harder than it needs to be. And that can be hard to explain because from the outside, it can look like you're coping well, or it can look like you are procrastinating. For a long time, I've wanted to be more consistent on social media, but my anxiety has held me back in a lot of ways. So when I've talked about this to people who haven't dealt with anxiety, they've quite often said, "Oh, well, just post more." And it's like, "Oh, okay, thank you for telling me to just post more. What about all of the anxiety and overwhelm and mental health that I'm struggling with? What about that?" So, and that's not a criticism of those people. It just means they haven't experienced the type of feeling that you or I have been dealing with. But we know inside how much energy it takes to keep moving. So don't allow others to pull that from you either. But it's interesting. Some of the things I've been thinking about over the last 18 months is how strange it can feel to be both ambitious and anxious. Because on one hand, there's a part of you that wants this big life to grow, to build, to push yourself, to be known for something meaningful, to create impact, to become more, to test your limits. But on the other hand, there's this anxious part of your mind that wants safety, certainty, reassurance. It wants to avoid rejection or embarrassment. It doesn't want to get anything wrong. It wants to avoid discomfort. And you end up with this internal tug of war. Part of you wants expansion. Part of you wants protection. Part of you wants to be seen. Part of you wants to hide. Part of you wants the bigger life. Part of you is almost frightened by what that bigger life might require from you. And I think that tension is is very real. I've felt that with business, with content, with this podcast at times, developing my own personal brand. I felt it in moments where I knew what I wanted to say or do, but could also feel the anxiety trying to pull me backwards into hesitation, doubt, delay, and silence as well. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that if they still feel anxious, it means they're on the wrong path. And I don't think that's true. Sometimes anxiety is not a sign that you shouldn't do the thing. It's just a sign that the thing matters. And it's a sign that you care. It's a sign that there's risk, that you're stepping into the arena, that you're growing, that you're being stretched. And that doesn't mean every anxious feeling should be ignored. But I do think it's important not to treat anxiety like a compass that should always make decisions for you. If I let my anxiety make all my decisions, I wouldn't have my business, that's for sure. I wouldn't have this podcast. I would be in a job I wasn't particularly enjoying. and I wouldn't be enjoying my life. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So although it's a contributing factor to a lot of things, don't allow it to make those big life decisions that it really has a hold on you. One of the biggest things anxiety has taught me is that avoidance makes everything worse. It gives short-term relief, but long-term pain. And this is such a brutal truth, and I think it's a really important one. When you're anxious, avoidance feels tempting. Avoid the conversation, avoid the post, avoid the decision, avoid that hard thing, avoid the uncomfortable task, the uncertainty, whatever it is that you think about as you're trying to fall asleep at night. Whatever that is that's making your chest tighten or your mind race, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. In the short term, avoidance does feel like that relief. You postpone it, you distract yourself, you tell yourself you'll deal with it later, and for a moment, the pressure drops. But then something else happens. The thing usually gets bigger, your confidence probably drops, your self trust takes a hit, the avoidance gains power, and the pattern gets reinforced. You teach yourself that retreat's the answer. And that's pretty dangerous because once avoidance becomes a habit, your world starts shrinking. Not overnight, but quietly. You start to speak less, take less risks, you hide a little bit more, try a little bit less, you put things off a lot more, and eventually the life you could have lived starts drifting further away. That is one of the reasons I care so much about courage, not because I don't think courage means being fearless, but because courage interrupts avoidance. I think it's one of the biggest terms or biggest habits, being courageous, that we can have. Courage says, I feel like this, anxious, awful, insert the word, overwhelmed, whatever you want it to be. I feel like this, but I'm still going to move forward. And honestly, some of the proudest moments of my life have not been moments where I felt fearless. They've been moments where I felt anxious, but still did the thing. And I personally think that's real bravery, and that's something that we should really be striving for. If there is one thing anxiety has taught me about, it is that courage is not calmness. I think for a long time, maybe without even realizing it, I thought courage would feel cleaner than it does. I thought brave people probably felt brave. They felt ready, felt certain, felt steady, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think that anymore. I think courage often feels messy. I think courage often feels like acting with a shaky hand. I think courage often feels like doing the thing while part of you is still full of doubt. I think courage often feels like moving before your emotions have caught up. And that has been such an important lesson for me, because if you wait to feel calm before you act, you will wait a very, very long time. Sometimes confidence comes after the rep. Sometimes relief comes after the conversation. And sometimes momentum comes after you finally stop delaying the thing that's been haunting you. And that matters because I know there are people listening who think they need to feel different before they can move forward. But often, moving forward is what starts changing how you feel. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. And I think that that is one of the most important things I've learned. Anxiety and courage can exist in the same person, on the same day, in the same moment. You can be anxious and still be brave, and you can be anxious and still build. You can be anxious and speak. You can be anxious and still lead. You can be anxious and powerful as well. That is not a weakness. Dealing with those two things at the same time is most certainly a strength. Now, something I want to be really clear about here is that I'm not trying to present a neat formula or even pretend that I know how to deal with anxiety. I haven't. This is something I live with. I've learned about it and I continue to navigate it. But there are a few things that have helped me. And the first is honesty. It's just being honest about what's happening, not pretending that I'm fine when I'm not dressing everything up in productivity, not acting like overthinking is just being thorough, not causing anxiety 10 different names to avoid admitting that I'm anxious. Honesty really helps because it stops you fighting that hidden battle. Once you can name it, you can work with it more clearly. It's like that old adage, know your enemy, something like that. And the second thing that helps is action. Not huge action, not reckless action, just honest action. Whatever that next rep is, I don't necessarily mean the gym either. It could be sending that message, posting that content, writing out that business plan, whatever it is, something that interrupts the spiral is something that is so important because anxiety loves loops, circular thinking, and action breaks loops. The the third thing that helps is structure. I think structure matters a lot because when your mind is busy, having some sort of order helps me. So getting up at the same time, working out, having things prepped for me like food, journaling, meditating, exercise, like I say, having those kind of routines and standards enables me to improve my mood and make me feel like I am in a better place for the day and trying to kind of know what the day is meant to hold for me in a way as well. Not because that it makes it all perfect, but because it gives your mind less room to drift into chaos, which obviously we'll want to avoid as much as possible when it comes to our anxiety. The other thing is perspective. So many anxious thoughts feel huge in the moment, but trying to take a step back and actually saying what's actually true here, why do I feel like I do, can be fairly grounding. Trying to think about what you are feeling anxious about. What is it? Is it a micro decision? Is it a bigger thing you need to address? Trying to be honest about what is actually true here is really important to try and bring that anxiety under control. And finally, a bit of self-compassion matters more than I used to think. And not talking about letting yourself off the hook for everything. I'm talking about not making your own internal experience worse by attacking yourself for having it. Because there is enough weight and anxiety already without adding self-hatred on top. You can be kind to yourself and still hold a high standard. Those things are not opposites. And what I would also say with regards to being kind to yourself, some of the things that I've done with that regard, well, there's two things. The first one is on a Wednesday, quite often a Wednesday, I will go and have the morning in a cafe and I'll order breakfast and I'll journal and I will do a bit of planning and I'll do some work I actually enjoy. I might read a chapter of my book as well. And that morning is almost like a mini holiday. It's glorious. It's lovely. I look forward to it every week. The other thing I've added is once a month, I take a half day on the last Friday and I take my dog Luna and we go hike a mountain or walk a trail and I have the afternoon doing that and I don't do any work. And those two things I would never have thought about doing before I took this 18-month break from this podcast. I've only started doing those things this year in 2026, but they've made a big difference to me. So having things you look forward to each week and each month that break up your week can help you take control of that anxiety in different ways. So be kind to yourself. Think about how you might be able to bring yourself back off the ledge and calm yourself down when you are in that spiral. And maybe going on a walk one afternoon would help. Maybe buying breakfast in a cafe would help as well. But one of the main takeaways I want to give you from this episode is that you can absolutely build a big life with anxiety. I really believe that. You can build a business, you can build a great physique, you can create content, you can be a team leader or manager, you can go on a stage and be a speaker, you can go after any meaningful thing that you want to. Will anxiety make parts of it harder? Yes. Might anxiety make some days heavier? Yes. Might you have to work a little bit harder at self-awareness and emotional regulation than someone else? Quite possibly. But it does not automatically disqualify you from living a powerful life. And I think that really matters because there are so many people who are quietly assuming that because anxiety is part of their life, they need to lower the ceiling on who they can become. And I do not believe that. I think anxiety is something you almost learn to carry in a way, in a sense. You learn how to deal with it. Hopefully, you can get rid of it completely, or you can figure out a way to manage anxiety in a way that doesn't completely hold you back. Not perfectly, but almost skillfully. And maybe part of being unstoppable is exactly that. Not waiting for all the struggle to leave your life, not waiting to become a different person, not allowing it to hold you back, but learning how to move forward with what is true. And that to me is pretty unstoppable. And that feels pretty real to me because I don't want this message of mental toughness to ever be fake. I don't want it to sound like be stronger, feel nothing, push it all down. That is of no interest to me. Mental toughness to me is being honest about what is hard and still choosing not to fold. That's very different. And if you're listening to this and anxiety is part of your life too, I just want to say this really clearly. You're not weak. You're definitely not broken. You are not disqualified from a meaningful life. And you are definitely not the only one trying to hold ambition in one hand and anxiety in the other. I know how tiring it can be. I know how frustrating it can be when your own mind makes things harder than it really needs to be. I know how lonely it can feel when people only see the version of you that is coping. I know how exhausting it can be to look functional on the outside and still feel the churn underneath. But I also know this. You can build self-trust. You can become braver. You can still do hard things. You can expand your life. You can still become someone you are proud of. And sometimes the win is not that you felt fearless. The win is that you felt anxious and still went and did it anyway. And to me, that is the biggest win of all. It counts a hell of a lot. So if that's where you're at right now, then maybe the challenge is not to become someone who never feels anxious again. Maybe the challenge is to become someone who no longer lets anxiety make every decision. And that is a powerful shift, and it starts small. One honest action, one difficult thing faced, one avoided thing no longer avoided, one promise kept, one brave moment at a time. That is enough. So if there's one thing I want you to take from this episode, it's this. Anxiety may be part of your life, but it does not have to be the author of your life. It can make things feel heavier. It can make your mind noisier. It can make courage feel less glamorous and more hard-earned. But it does not get to decide who you become unless you let it. You can still build, you can still grow, you can still become stronger and more self-respecting, even while anxiety is still part of the picture. And if you're in a season where you feel like your mind has been loud, where you've been carrying pressure, overthinking, dreading, internal tension, I just want to remind you that courage does not belong only to the calm. Courage belongs to anyone willing to keep moving, even when it feels hard. That is what I believe. This is what this podcast is about. And this is what we are building with this community. And that's what this community stands for. If this episode has resonated with you, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and come and find us online. Follow the Unstoppable Project on Instagram at Dr. David Hooper. It's just my personal profile at the moment, and across the other platforms where we'll be sharing clips, thoughts, and more from this journey as well. Thank you so much for being here with me. Until next time, stay unstoppable.